Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Frontier, where we explore the edge of innovation in American single malt whiskey. Here on the show, we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. Usually we talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations we get to have along the way. We get to talking about a little bit of everything. Our guest today is Jace Marti, one of the founders and the master distiller of Black Frost Distilling in Minnesota. Black Frost Distilling just released their first American single malt whiskey product on Black Friday this year. It's a 2-year-old American single malt, and like all of their whiskeys, it's made entirely from grain from the family farm, open top fermented to allow local wild yeast and bacteria to contribute to the flavor, and aged in new charred Minnesota-grown American white oak. For today's conversation, we'll also open up the discussion with 2 of Black Frost's previous products, a bourbon and a malted rye. We might even have a bit of a philosophical conversation about the American single malt whiskey category. As far as so Phil and I got our bottle of Black Frost American Single Malt Whiskey in advance, and we got to share it around with our families and friends at Thanksgiving. And safe to say, it was a hit. It's also a pretty unique tasting product. Not quite what I expected, but pleasingly different. So we'll get into that later. And what I can say is that definitely, like, I've tortured my family with tasting lots of different American single malt whiskeys. And rarely do they react so strongly positively to something that I've given them. Mostly it's just like, okay, that was interesting. And this really captured their attention. So I'm curious to see, for those of you who are able to get it, and I know some of you actually can, which is kind of awesome. There's actually more than one of you is from this area of Minnesota, which is pretty cool. I'm excited to find out what you guys think of it. And for the people who I am able to get samples to, we'll figure that out also. So, you know, I wrote too long of an intro, so I'm going to stop yapping. I want to actually transition to something else we've been trying to start for way too long. So we've been saying we're going to syndicate this podcast somewhere other than YouTube. We're going to make a Patreon. We've been saying this for like a year and a half. We have officially launched the Patreon. We did it about 15 minutes ago. So the link to that is in the YouTube video description and in the chat. So for those of you who've been longtime viewers, we have a $5 tier, a $10 tier, and a $25 tier. We have ideas for how to make those things uniquely valuable to you. $5 is basically just support us, and you'll get early access to anything we release on Patreon. $10 gets you access to like happy hour calls, and the $25 tier will get you access to, hopefully, fingers crossed, I have to get people to agree to it, but for you to get direct FaceTime and chat with some of the guests that we've had on the show, probably one at a time. So basically just like more opportunity for you to interact more directly with the people on the show. This show is quieter than most. Do you mean the microphone levels?
No, that was supposed to before we went live.
Oh, okay.
Because we were behind.
Okay, cool. Oh, right.
Creating the Patreon page.
Yeah, sorry. We had glitches. We had pre-show stuff. It's fun stuff. Okay, so I'm not going to go on and on about like what's on the Patreon, partly because we're still filling it out, right? There's only so much time to push buttons, but we are going to publish the podcast through that. We're going to post exclusive content that's never been released on the YouTube channel or anywhere else because it wasn't a direct fit for our format. So we're talking old audio only interviews that I did before there was a podcast, because I started interviewing producers for a book. And audio seemed good enough at the time. And then it's just like, oh, what do I do? An audiogram and like post it up as a video feels weird. But it's definitely a place where you'll be able to listen to some of that content. I think we have like 6 to 8 of those recordings, possibly. And then we'll figure out sort of what else to add for exclusive. We might even switch this from a live YouTube show to a live Patreon show, and then YouTube gets it a couple of days later, so you can get early access. We'll see. Let us know what you think feels good. We want the Patreon to feel valuable to you, because we know at least some of you have asked us like, hey, how do we support you? Like, how do we give you money to help run the show? We just never had a good answer for that. So primarily the Patreon is just a way to let you do that. And we want to make it valuable to you along the way. So let us know what will make it valuable for you, and we'll cater it to your needs and interests. So teamwork, right? Sounds good? Cool. With no further ado, let's introduce our guest for today. So Jace Marti, thank you for putting up with that self-promo.
I learned a lot
no
about
further
Patreon.
ado. Yeah. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us about your brand and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Jace Marti. I am one of the co-founders, master distiller here at Black Frost Distilling. We're located in Newell, Minnesota. As far as what I do, we're a very small team, so kind of a little bit everything. Starting a distillery, running a distillery. So yeah, can definitely get in more of that as we go. But that's the quick intro.
For sure. So I'm gonna get out ahead of myself and actually pour this bourbon in the glass now. So
Sure.
I have pre-tasted the American Single Malt, but I haven't tasted the bourbon or the
Join
rum
ya.
yet. So this will be a surprise to everyone.
Yeah.
And just kind of let that sit in the glass for a minute. And I guess so. Black Frost Distilling is 3 years old.
Correct.
You have a 2-year-old American Single Malt, so that was seemingly, at least relatively early on, part of the plan.
Yes.
I guess the first question, to go back to the beginning, why start a distillery? Why start a distillery in the frozen north of Minnesota, where it is negative degrees right now, as I understand?
Yeah. Yeah. It's been snowing all day, and it's gonna drop down into the double negative degree digits overnight. So yeah, it's definitely, we're in winter. Why did we start a distillery? So a little bit about my background. I think that'll help explain a little bit. So I grew up in the alcohol business, kind of been around it my entire life. My family is the part of the August Shell Brewing Company, or is the August Shell Brewing Company, which is the second oldest family-owned brewery in the country. And I worked there. You know, my dad ran the business growing up, and so like I spent my whole childhood basically at the brewery, and started working there in high school. You know, doing a lot of officially full-time in high school, but a lot of, you know, crappy jobs before that. But yeah, throughout high school, went to college, came back, and you know, I started originally in like the bottle house, washing kegs, did all that stuff, a lot of fun stuff there. Went to college for graphic design, kind of wanted to come back and work in like advertising and sales a little bit. Did that for a couple years, and then was homebrewing at the same time, right out of college, and shifted into brewing. And so was doing that, and then went to brewing school. I studied brewing at the VLB in Berlin, and interned at a brewery in Upper Bavaria and in Austria, one of my classmates' breweries, and then came back. And so then I was more on the brewing side of things. So working with the lab, quality control, a lot of like new beers, creative, you know, this is like the rise of craft beer. And so it would definitely, as an old brewery, I mean, this year they're 165 years. 165 years old. So it's, you know, we were part of the old guard, and like wanting to stay relevant with the craft beer trends, which we were very much a part of, and but staying true to our roots at the same time. So when I came back, I started a mixed culture sour beer program, making Berliner Weiss style beers, and restored old wooden lagering tanks that we had in one of our cellars. And yeah, so I spent 20 years working there full time. But to bring it back into why I started a distillery, it was 12 years ago. I wanted to incorporate locally grown barley into our base malt at Shells. And that conversation kind of stemmed from a wide ranging conversation from different parties. One of them being Rahr Malting Company, which is in Shakopee, Minnesota. They're 45 minutes away from the brewery here in Newell. It's the largest single site malt house in North America, and not a single barley field to be found anywhere nearby. And they said, you know, when this malt house was built, this was the epicenter of the barley growing region, and it just keeps moving farther and farther north and west. And that's a problem for them, because you have the infrastructure there, but you got to truck or rail it in from longer and longer distances. And it was kind of like, well, you know, how do we grow our own? Like if it grew here, like it should be able to grow in here. And then I had this kind of second chance encounter. I was doing a beer tasting at a restaurant. I love telling this story. It was a hot day in Minnesota. and it was out on like an outdoor patio, and there was two people that were having a really good time. And they were drinking Duvels, which is like a very strong Belgian beer if you've never had it before. And offered them some beers. This, I don't know how it like turned into like a conversation about barley, but turns out it was one of the small grains agronomists from the University of Minnesota and a grad student. She was, had her dissertation approved, and they were out celebrating. So we ended up having this like 4-hour conversation that night about like, hey, help us grow barley. This is something we want to do. We want to incorporate this. And so that was kind of the catalyst for what would become our like locally grown barley project. We called it the Fort Road series, which is a road where the barley has been grown on. And I convinced my good high school friend, now business partner, who is a 5th generation family farmer. I'm like, hey, can you grow us some barley? And I talked about this for years, and he just kind of like laughed it off. And finally, there was, crop prices had changed, and convinced him like, yeah, let's do this. So I believe he planted like 30 acres the first year, something like that. And we'd worked with the U of M on selecting a variety that we liked from a flavor standpoint, agronomic standpoint, all the things that he had to do differently for planting it in a specific area. And, we were a couple weeks from harvest. The field was looking amazing. And we went out to the field one night, a couple beers in tow, walked out. It was kind of like a sloping hill, walked up to the top of the hill in the middle of the field and watched the sunset, kind of took in the moment, just like, this is pretty cool. And he just, as like kind of a throwaway comment, said, what else can we do with barley? Like, I want to grow more of this. And I said to him, like, well, you can make whiskey with it. And wasn't the intention that we would be the ones making whiskey with it, but it was kind of that like light bulb aha moment that went off. And yeah, here we are, 12 years later.
Yeah, that was a very romantic image for sure. The hilltop looking out over your field.
It was awesome. It was like, if you've never gotten a chance to stand in the middle of a barley field, it's pretty special. Like just even that like waving field, and like you also like you get a bit of vertigo too because it's so tightly planted, and when you're walking through it, especially if it's windy, like you kind of lose track of where your center of gravity is. And like, yeah, I remember that was my first time like experiences like, whoa, I'm like gonna tip over, and I'm like just walking through a flat field. But yeah, it's definitely a really cool experience.
Cool. So yeah, as you were saying that, I realized in retrospect, barley is kind of known for growing far up north. So barley for sure makes sense.
Yeah.
And that sort of leads to the question, like, how much was American Single Malt Whiskey part of your initial plan? Because it wasn't the first thing you released.
No,
correct.
Yep.
Barley was sort of your brewing background, your farm sort of founded on the barley.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, no, that was like definitely going to be part of the plan for sure. So we had that kind of aha moment, and there was some time that goes by. It's like this like, oh, crazy idea like that is slowly building. I had a beer event in Nashville. It was a sour beer festival. I told him, hey, why don't you come down and like we can work our way back through Tennessee, Kentucky. We'll do the Bourbon Trail, and worst case scenario, we just got to drink a bunch of whiskey, visiting a bunch of distilleries, having a good time. And so he came down. I think we visited like 35 distilleries, and that really cemented our idea of, one, we can do this, and then two, like what we wanted to do. And for us, it was like seeing the scale of everything that's being produced there. And like Shell's is a very traditional brewery, and I respect that greatly, but like having the opportunity to be on the other side where you can start fresh without kind of being bound by tradition. We looked at that as like, here's our opportunity that we need to focus on something. And that for us was, we wanted to focus on Northern terroir, kind of that wine concept of, he can grow everything on his family farm. Minnesota's unique that we have a pretty substantial oak forest and two barrel cooperages. And so we can get all the barrels that we need to age our spirits here in Minnesota as well. So really kind of intentionally boxing ourselves in and only using, we say, northern grown ingredients to make our whiskeys, and wanted to make something unique because of that. And then kind of taking cues from the brewing side, the agronomic side, and like my background in like sour beer production too, to like try and incorporate some different techniques, because again, like what we saw was very traditional, and wanted to try and do something different, especially since like, not, I don't know if we were late to the game, we're 3 years old, but like it's pretty well established at this point. And so it was like a startup. We wanted to make sure that we were going to do something that our reason for being was there. So, and then, yeah, we wanted to focus on whiskey, and bourbon, rye, American single malt was our focus. And that's what we started from day one, basically laying down a third. So a third bourbon, third rye, third American single malt. And yeah, so that's what we've been doing.
So
Awesome.
if you don't mind,
Mhm.
on the topic of barley, you put on your label the types of malt that you use, the
Mhm.
Pilsner, honey, extra special, and caramel, which are all beer malts, which, is not typical for distilleries to use. Distilleries tend to use sort of distillery or distillation specific malts. Was your choice to use those grains sort of built from your brewing background, or was that sort of a sort of keying into the brewing tradition around New Ulm?
Definitely from my brewing experience. Yeah. So from brewing, and especially like with sour beer production too, like if you think of like lambics and gooses where raw grains are more prevalent there, I don't like the taste of raw grains and how it produces the alcohol that you get from it. I'm used to malted grains. I think malted grain, whether it be barley, wheat, rye, is a much better flavor than the raw grain itself. Not that the raw grain itself can't produce something very unique and special. I just think that you're amplifying that flavor, and you can take it in different directions. And so for all of our whiskeys, bourbon, rye, and American single malt, the only raw grain we use is our corn for the bourbon, in a little bit in the rye. But otherwise, all of the barley, wheat, rye, it's all malted, and then we use both just like a Pilsner version or like a base malt type of a version, and then a lot of specialty malt. So like our bourbon is made with caramel malted wheat, caramel malted rye. The rye is a lot of caramel malted rye, obviously, and then American single malt, we experiment with a lot of different specialty malted varieties of the barley.
I should have clarified. I meant that you use specialty malts that aren't typical for distillation.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned sense of terroir and place, and I kind of wanted to ask how much the just not just from the locally grown grain, the locally grown oak for your casks, but also the way that the extreme cold in the winters and the fairly mild summers sort of affect the way your whiskey ages differently than it ages in other parts of the country.
Yeah. We it's cold in Minnesota, as is right now. And if you from a scientific standpoint, if you look at maturation, essentially stops below 45 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like 6 months out of the year here. So if we don't do something, our whiskeys will be very immature from a strictly a temperature standpoint. So what we do, our distillery is in an old brick warehouse. It was an old grocery distribution warehouse called New Ulm Wholesale. It's 3 stories. I'm in our tasting room right now. So high ceilings, very thick concrete, poured concrete, and up above, and maybe later we can go wander around. On the top floor is our rick house. And what we do to kind of, counteract that temperature issue is we capture the waste heat from distillation, and then also the city of New Ulm, the entire downtown is heated by city steam. The city power plant is up, not even a
that's
block,
cool.
up, not even a block away from us, and so we don't have a boiler on site, which was
Oh,
very beneficial. We can have
That is really cool.
24/7
yeah. The number of
superheated.
stories I've heard of the boiler or the chillers out, and
Yeah.
that's a problem.
Yep. Yeah, that was one thing. Like when we were designing the distillery, it's like it has to be in the downtown steam zone. Like that's non-negotiable. So we have 24/7 superheated steam coming from the city. Also super cheap and very reliable. But we are like city of New Ulm is in the river valley, and they didn't want to put in a condensate pump to pump the steam back up to the plant, and so we just dump our waste condensate down the drain. So instead of dumping that, we just redirect it up into our rick house. So when we're distilling, we designed our HVAC system to blow up. It's an old elevator shaft where the still is, all the heat up there into our rick house. So it naturally heat cycles there. There's lots of windows. We get sunlight. And then in the wintertime, we open up the condensate valve so that we're kind of recapturing that waste heat and steam. So it's constantly like the coldest we'll ever get is 55 degrees, but in the summertime, 110 degrees. So yeah, we're kind of artificially increasing the temperature, but in a very sustainable way, I guess, with just utilizing waste heat off of the production process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think a lot of people are like, oh, climate controlled aging, you're taking the romance out of terroir, but like you're doing it as a byproduct of your production process, which like, to me feels, it's authentic in a practical way, because you can't let the whiskey go to sleep for 6 months. You're just burning time.
I would also like to point out that for those who would say that isn't traditional, there were steam heated warehouses in Pennsylvania pre-prohibition for aging whiskey.
And I'll go back to like, we're not bound by tradition. Like that's kind of the fun thing is like, we can blaze our own path. We're a startup. We're 3 years old. Like we have to do something that is different. And if that makes a better whiskey by heat cycling anywhere else, and we can do it in a sustainable way by just recapturing waste heat, absolutely. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah. And sustainable, of course, shows up in the prices. And so, I mean, this is not a sponsored podcast, but we look up the prices occasionally because we like to know what we're working with, especially when we get free samples. Sometimes we just don't realize what things cost. So Phill looked up the prices on these, or I asked. So one way or another, we found out the prices. So
46 for the wheated bourbon, 55 for the malted rye, and I don't remember the price point.
The same for the American Single Malt.
Yep, 45 and 55 is kind of our price ranges that we wanted to start with.
Which
so that's on the lower end for American Single Malt, frankly. And that's great. Like that shows, you're being sustainable with your costs for sure. I think sustainability shows up in terms of cost savings more often than not. So that's really just the proof in the pudding. It helps that, these products are relatively young, but they don't taste particularly youthful. And at this point, I've just gone and poured all three because we don't need to get hung up on tasting notes for these while Phill doesn't have anything to drink. And it's actually really fascinating to just kind of go back and forth between them and compare. Phill, you're going to be excited to try this malted rye.
Yeah, I'm going to have the friend of mine who owes me a smoky and abandoned case of Grain Belt to also mail me some of the rye.
I've made a lot of Grain Belt in my life.
Yeah. Donut Fish says the rest of the USA does not really understand how cold Arctic clippers are, which typically hit Minnesota directly.
Ooh,
I believe that's a weather pattern. I don't know.
Can I tell a story really quick? I promise it's relevant.
No, go for it.
In 2019, I spent 2 weeks in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that general area, at a convention. Which was really just a whole bunch of friends getting together. And we made the mistake of meeting in Minneapolis in January of 2019. And the day that we left, the temperature hit 50 below, And as our poor minivan was in the driveway struggling to get warm enough to run evenly, and we were shoveling the driveway to get out before the blizzard hit, an icicle about an inch in diameter formed between the tailpipe of the van and the surface of the driveway. It was so cold that just seconds before steam vapor out of the exhaust of the van condensed to water and then froze solid.
Yep.
The temperatures in Minnesota are nothing to scoff at.
No, when I checked the weather, I was like, wait, do I have my phone in Fahrenheit? Because those negative numbers show up sooner in Celsius,
Yeah.
And I've been known to do that. Okay, so while we have a little bit of a lull, I want to take a moment to acknowledge everyone who came in to the chat.
Yes.
Because normally we do acknowledge them quite a bit earlier than 25 minutes in. Rangers Respite, thanks for showing up first. We started our pre-show real early today because we wanted to hammer out that Patreon before we went live. Mr. Scott Friedland says, looking forward to this one. He's actually got a bottle of the American Single Malt and he's drinking along with us. And so does Donut Fisher. So these are the two guys who actually were able to get the Black Frost products, which is really cool.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that.
So, and Donut Fisher is trying some Cedar Ridge and Nate Ganna's barrel pick, a Muscatel cask finish. So that's cool. And by the way, feel free to tell everyone what you're drinking, just like generally. Y'all don't have to stay on topic. I understand that not everyone has the whiskey we're drinking at all times. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, cool. And yep, some chatter about the logistics behind Patreon. We'll figure it out, guys. We'll find a way. But thank you for your support already. We've got 2 subscribers. That's awesome. And welcome in, Travis. Good to see you. I think I'm not going to highlight that comment because I don't want to draw attention to the difficulties with Patreon. Let's see. Yes, and we're going to start a Discord. We're probably long past. We've been kind of piggybacking on the Whiskey Lodge for quite a while now, including our sign-off being a reference to the Whiskey Lodge. And that's cool, but that community was never about this podcast. We were just a podcast that grew out of that community, and it feels increasingly problematic that a lot of the discourse around my content creation is happening in what should be a public channel that's not about my podcast. So I think it's time for us to have a Discord, and that'll be a better place for. I know some of you guys are not necessarily in tune with that community, and you'd like to communicate with this community and not that community. So that also is a reason. So much appreciated. Yeah, and this comment, yeah, we were a little bit late starting because we had to sort out some stuff. So the show was quieter than most because there was no audio at all. We weren't live yet. Scott, I believe, met you, Jace, or just missed you because you were at a parade. But he did stop by the distillery and picked up.
Yes, I missed you, Scott. Sorry about that. But you got to talk to Nate. Talk a little about the farming side of things.
Yeah, and the malted rye. So, like, out of these 3, the nose on the malted rye is like the most absolutely heavenly. I want to get in some tasting notes, but I didn't pre-taste it, so I'll be doing it off the cuff.
Sure.
And Germ, good to see you. Whenever you come back in the chat, I don't know if you're hearing this or not. Let's see. Donut Fisher's having Viker Iron Range ASMW. I've never heard of that one. Another Minnesota ASM. See, I've got a lot of work to do in the Midwest and the North.
Hmm?
Do you consider Minnesota to be the Midwest? This is not meant to be a hot potato question.
Oh boy!
There was. Yes, like geographically we're in the Midwest, but like Minnesota thinks that we're like culturally succeeding from the Midwest as like our own. Think we're a little better than the Midwest.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And Brother Justice is also out of Minnesota, I believe.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
We need to have them on the show as well.
Yes, you should absolutely get them on there. I can get you in contact with Phill if you need his contact info.
Yeah, it always helps to have extra referrals. I gather that his inbox is quite busy because we've talked in person a few times. He's down for the podcast, and I don't think I've ever heard back from him on email. So, but that could just be me. I try not to be too much of a pest.
Okay.
Sometimes I might just email at a bad time, though. So Ethan says he's having a Signatory Glentalker's 12-year-old. Yeah, I mean, it's okay to pour scotch here. We're single malt lovers. All right. So thanks everyone for hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. This is, by the way, the chat is one of the reasons we like doing this show live. You give us some questions to ask and some discussion fodder, and it makes us feel like we're part of a community instead of just speaking into the void. I think it's good for everybody. So at least it makes it more fun. So all right, I've had the bourbon in the glass for a while. I said 20 minutes. It's been longer than 20 minutes. Let's do some tasting notes and try to move on with sort of the next topic of discussion. So the bourbon, I get a little bit of a candy corn on the nose, which is cool. You mentioned, so it's a wheated. I want to talk about the labels on these because they are a bit of a mouthful, and they are in the video description as well. And I love a good type name. And a good, fanciful name, or like whatever it is that went into getting the TTB to approve this wording. Yeah. I am always curious. So Black Frost Distilling, wheated blended bourbon whiskey.
Yes.
And I immediately asked you about the blended.
Yep.
Because blended can mean so many things in American whiskey. And sometimes it's the bad words, right? It's like wine was mixed in, or neutral spirits were mixed in, or what have you. So I asked you on Instagram. I got an answer that I liked, but I'm not gonna put the words in your mouth. Tell us, what does blended mean for this product? Yeah,
so this goes back to our original, like when we were kind of having that formative trip of through the bourbon trail. And it's even the same with brewing. Like, you can tell someone your recipe down to the exact percent of what you're trying to make. And what we saw is every distillery is like, this is our perfect recipe. This is our perfect recipe, whatever. And the reality is, like, it all depends on your house flavor, like what your brewery or distillery, the size and shape of every piece of equipment, the length of pipes, the size, that it all changes the flavor. And so with distilling, in brewing, you can make a beer, and in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, you can have that finished beer. Instant feedback, make a change, boom, boom, boom. Like, your feedback loop is really short. In distilling, you almost are like, if you pick a recipe or your mash bill, you're stuck with that for life. And that wasn't something I was willing to like stick my neck out and make, because I knew we wanted to do a lot of things differently, and like to try and just like pick a mash bill from a distillery that in Kentucky that we liked, I wasn't comfortable with doing. And so like we talked about this, and what we ended up doing is like, let's break it down into single grain whiskeys. Let's just focus on making the best possible whiskey that we can from each individual grain that we're going to be distilling, and then worry about the flavor down the road. And so what we do is we mash, ferment, distill, and barrel age single grain whiskeys. That's what we do. We're just making blending components. And so even the whiskeys that we're making of those, they are not themselves very balanced, because we know that they're going to be they're parts of a bigger puzzle down the road. So we make, for this wheated blended bourbon, the base component, which bourbon has to be 51% corn, is a 90-10 corn mash is what we do. Obviously, corn doesn't have any enzymes to convert it, so we use 10% of our estate-grown malted barley. The rest is just plain old yellow number 2 dent corn that Nate grows on his family farm. And then we'll do a 20-barrel blend batch of this. We'll take 5 barrels of wheat. Of that, we're going to do, the recipe is like 75% like a base malted wheat, and then 25% Cara Crystal malted wheat. And then with our rye, we do the same thing, like 75%, 25% of like base malted rye, caramel rye. And then with the American Single Malt, we do kind of, that's probably the closest thing we have to recipes, where we'll do like 100% base malt recipes, and then like kind of that similar ratio of like 75% base malt plus a bunch of these other different grains. And it's constantly mix them, that we just, again, the goal is that we're always going to try and lay down as many blending components as we can make. and then knowing that we can then take those components when they're of a mature age and we kind of know what they're going to do, and then blend those. So like to make our whiskey, we'll do 6 months to a year before we're ready to release it, go through sensory, pick those barrels, dump them into a tank, and then re-barrel that now as like a blended recipe, let them age or, you know, marry together back in the tanks and then, or in the barrel, sorry. And then we'll proof them down before we bottle it. So that's why it's blended bourbon whiskey, blended rye whiskey. It's all that we're blending in-house. It's more of like akin to like how Canadian whiskey is made, not minus the, you know, the additions, the 3% additions. We're no additives in any of these things. It's only that we knew that we didn't know. And so that's why I was like, let's just make the best single grain whiskeys we can. And then we have now a rick house full of blending components that we can do whatever we want with them down the road.
Yeah, so chat picked up on this right away.
Yeah.
You mentioned it yourself, Jace. So you distill in a Canadian style. All the grains are distilled separate and aged separate.
100%.
And you blend your product. And that's when you gave me that answer on Instagram, I was like, great. I can connect with that. I understand, right?
Yeah.
You know, just because we're fans of American Single Malt doesn't mean we don't study other types of grains. We just have less to say about it. But one of the coolest things about Canadian whiskey is that it's always blended in this style. Every single grain is produced separately and aged separately, and then blended together into a final product where from your existing stock, even from the same barrels, you could blend completely different products because, you know, you're not stuck with the same, like you said, you're not stuck with the same, I don't know, 75% corn, 12-13 mash bill that you're stuck with forever. The only way that you could change that is if you had effectively enough of another mash bill to manipulate the percentages. But, you know, you're starting from paints to build, like from like the pure color paints, so you can mix any colors you want and make whatever picture you want. I think that's really cool. I am curious if you know how the labeling process went on this. Did TTB compel you to put blended on?
Yes, had to be.
And then how do the other words like bourbon fit into that? Because bourbon would seem to be counter to this idea where all bourbon has to be distilled, I think 51% corn, unless I'm mistaken. I could be. Yeah,
so it still classifies as a bourbon. It's a subcategory of bourbon. So, you know, like I said, it's a 20 barrel blend. 14 of those is that 90-10 corn recipe that we use. That is, we call it internally a corn recipe. It is bourbon on its own. So we're blending in wheat whiskey and rye whiskey into the bourbon, and that's what makes it a blended bourbon. So it is, It is a subcategory of, so we could have labeled it either as blended bourbon whiskey or bourbon whiskey, a blend. I don't know if we should have taken one or the other, but we went with blended bourbon whiskey.
And I think this is good. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
the comma a blend thing is a weird construction. It makes sense maybe in like the early 20th century. I don't think it makes as much sense now. It doesn't read well.
And the way that one had to be labeled was it had to be all continuous in one straight line, because I submitted that one originally and they would let us stack this other one.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Way better for a label.
Right. Yeah. So I looked, I love my labels, right? Audience, I'm a geek, right? American Single Malt Whiskey. Hey, whiskey's on the last line. However, I'm certain this was applied for as an American Single Malt Whiskey cola because I saw the cola.
Yes.
And that's how this conversation got started about
this. This is how this conversation started. Yep.
And then we come over to the blended rye malt whiskey, and whiskey once again is on a line by itself. Hey, is that actually blended rye malt whiskey or is that whiskey? And I think the answer is it's the whole thing. The
so your sample bottle, that's how it looks on the actual label.
Yeah. And then so go ahead and show us the bourbon as well. So like this may be a different label, but this says wheated blended on one line and then bourbon whiskey on another line. Okay, so whiskey actually on the bottles themselves, whiskey is always on its own line. So I suppose technically you could have just applied for the base whiskey label, but that's not nearly as cool as calling it wheated blended bourbon whiskey, which is, I mean, you know, blended is a bad word for some people in American whiskey, but I think it just helps to understand what it means in this particular case, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with what you're doing. And in fact, I think it's very cool what you're doing. I think more people should do it that way because everyone else boxing themselves in.
And we look at it as an opportunity to like start a conversation, right? Like, hey, this is not what you think it is. This is how we're doing it. This is something that's different. We think is unique. We think it makes a better whiskey. And so that's why we're going to do it. And like, we've done one mash. We were like a year in, and we kind of had like settled on what was going to be the bourbon recipe. Like, hey, let's just make one, whatever that the it's a 63, 25, 7, 5. We did a single mash of that, put those in barrels. It tastes nothing like what the blend tastes like. It's not even close. And I use the analogy, this is a very, because we were talking about Midwest Minnesotan thing. It's like crock pot cooking versus like having a full-fledged kitchen. You can throw everything in a crock pot, put it on low, come back in a long time, and you're gonna have something that's gonna taste really great. And it all just kind of blends together. Or you can have a full-fledged kitchen where you can sear something, saute another thing, broil something like this, do that. And that's how we kind of look at it, is like, we're going to do what's best for those each individual ingredients. And then we can combine it on the plate at the end versus like throwing it all in. And it's going to be, they're both going to make something delicious, but same ingredients, you're going to get two completely different outcomes.
Yeah, and not that one is superior over the other. I mean, like,
no,
I
absolutely
love
not.
a crock pot meal, right? Those flavors coming together, that's a unique thing that happens with a crock pot that you just
And it is hot dish, 100% freedom malts.
Yeah. Yep, that's Midwest conversation right there.
Yes.
Everyone loves a good tater tot hot dish.
Is there a hot dish?
That's nice.
So, and likewise, I mean, I'm a big fan of, like you said, to take the analogy, I'm a big fan of the seared steaks and so on. And I mean, American Single Malt is putting a stake in the ground and saying, I want my 1 grain from distillation, aging to bottle. Well, blend different bottles, blend different barrels if you must, but I want my 1 grain. So, you know what audience you're talking to here. But, it is an interesting question. I assume people ask you all the time, right? Like, if you made the same, this product has a mash bill. If you made that same effective mash bill from distillation, aged and bottled exactly as is, would it taste the same? My assumption would be no. And the next question is, which one's better to your subjective?
Say that again one more time. Sorry, I was.
So you said you made the same. So you did make the same mash bill as your effective blended product.
Correct.
So in your subjective experience, having done that, which one tasted better?
I definitely prefer the blend. It just I thought you could get more like crisper flavors out of the ingredients, like the wheat and the rye. Like you could pick them up a little bit better, where it was like a little muddier. And not that muddy is the right term. I'm way down in a espresso coffee rabbit hole, so I'm kind of using more of like espresso terms. But I just thought,
chat if you're into espresso. I don't know if we've ever had this conversation before. I certainly am. It shows up on my social media sometimes.
Yeah, that's been my late night scrolling here. I just and then too, like the flexibility of it. Like, I just really like that because things are going to come to maturity at different times, and so as we continue to get older, like this is where we are at the start. In 5 years or 10 years down the road, like things are going to be at different points, and then we can blend those based on the flavor profiles at different ages to make unique products that way. And again, that's probably more for the rye and the bourbon, but like even with the single malt, because we're trying to make a bunch of different recipes too, like you're going to have different levels of maturity at different ages too that are going to show differently that way. So we really like this kind of paints on a palette approach that we've taken, and I don't think we would ever, if we had the chance to go back, I wouldn't go back to picking a mash bill and sticking with that one.
Yeah, and now add to the analogy that your paints change in vibrancy or color gently over time, and I don't know, you have to match the right paints together, or you're stuck with whatever happens in the blend as it ages. Yeah, makes total sense to me. I think it's really cool. I'm glad we got to have this particular conversation, because I think it's a shame that, I think subjectively, or maybe even objectively, this is like possibly a better way of, oh, that's fun. The lid cracked. You can't see that. No. Sorry, just distracted myself. I think even possibly objectively, blending from the components like that gives you so much more flexibility to create a truly excellent product. And if you do that, you're stuck with putting blended on the label. And I think that very fact is a deterrent from more distilleries doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's what I've noticed from tastings too is like I didn't think it would be a big deal. I think you have a certain consumer that is used to particularly blended Canadian products, thinking it's going to taste like, oh, blended, and even like blended scotches too, like where it's a lower quality. And so like there is that conversation that you have to have sometimes, like no, this is something different. But again, I look at it from like what we're trying to accomplish. I wouldn't do anything else, and I think that conversation is worth having, and hopefully like as we get out more, that people understand it. And especially in the bourbon world too, that there are a lot of, especially like the NDPs that are, really trying to like talk about how blending is really important. We're kind of in that wagon, but all in-house. We're not buying other products and blending that way. So yeah.
Cool. So as long as we're talking about non-ASM, there's so many comments about ASM, and I know everybody, we want to talk about the ASM. We're itching to get there, but let's hold our horses a little bit and talk about the bourbon and the rye for sure. So Donut Fisher asks, do your non-ASM whiskeys also use crosscut staves, or is that reserved for certain barrels of ASM only?
Yeah, so I'll talk about our barrels. That was definitely one of the I think the things that we thought would be unique with kind of focusing on terroir. Minnesota, if you look at it from like an agronomic standpoint, you have this cross section of an oak forest that grows from the southeast portion of the state up to the northwest portion of the state, right? So from like Rochester, Minnesota up to Fargo. And in that, we work with there's two barrel cooperages in Minnesota. There's Black Swan Cooperage and the Barrel Mill. Black Swan Cooperage is in like kind of the northwestern part of the state. Barrel Mill is in more of the central part of the state. So the crosscut stave that you mentioned, that is something that Black Swan Cooperage created. And what that is they, on the inside of the barrel, they alternate every other stave. Again, depending on how you spec it, they'll cut like, I don't know, 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch deep cross cuts in each of the staves that opens up the end grain. And that was something they patented because Minnesota grown oak, we have a shorter growing season here. It's a lot tighter, tighter grain in the oak. And that takes it's a lot harder for the liquid to penetrate through there. So by opening up the end grain, you're able to access all that, all those wood sugars a lot quicker than if you just like tried to force it through the wood. That's why our whiskeys have this really beautiful red color. A big part of that is that cross cut staves that we're using. That said, we use 3 different barrels. So like the main one is Black Swan Cooperage. That's the bulk of them. And then we're going to only use their cross-cut barrels. They also water bend their staves. So it's a little different. They argue that it makes a sweeter flavor profile, which I think I can't disagree with one bit. Another unique thing about the cold climate and then the shorter growing season, it produces more vanillin. And that's what we're trying to target, is that vanilla compound. That's a more water soluble compound. So we're going to go into the lower barrel entry proof. Everything we go into is 110 proof, and then we proof down in the barrel before bottling. And I always give it at least a month plus at bottling strength in the barrel to try and, again, extract as much of that vanillin as possible before we go to bottle. The second one, Barrel Mill, they're in the central part of the state. They're going to source their oak from that part of the state. They fire bend their staves, and so that's more of like a traditional barrel profile with the Minnesota oak. And then the third one, we work with Kelvin Cooperage, that's out of Louisville, Kentucky, but we spec barrels made with Stagmeyer Stave Mill staves. There's a stave mill in the southeastern portion of Minnesota that they supply to Kelvin. And so we get barrels from them that are only from the Minnesota staves out of Stagmeyer. And so now we have 2 fire bend staves and a water bend stave barrels. Everything's a medium toast number 3 char, but 3 completely different flavor profiles. And so even though like it's the same barrel spec, like a number 3 Kentucky is like a number 4 Minnesota char. And so like even their 3 is a lot heavier char than them. And then we got the 2 different, we have very different flavor profiles, and that's what we like, is we're going to blend complexity that way, all within using just Minnesota grown oak.
Yeah, and this again is another thing that the Canadian distilleries tend to do, where if you've isolated your grain, why not change one other thing, which is what's the barrel doing, right? And we'll get to a question later. We had a pre-submitted question about other types of casks other than New Charred Oak, but we'll get to that later once we get into the American Single Malt for sure. Freedom Malt says the crosscut staves is a very cool concept and 100% believes it has a massive effect on the aging spirit. And I'd say that the proof is in the whiskey. I think the first thing that stood out to me about the American Single Malt and about every one of these whiskeys is how sweet they present, but at the same time, they're not cloying. So with the American Single Malt, it was like, wow, this is, and we'll get it. Well, I need to stop stopping myself from talking about the American Single Malt because I spent the most time with it. You know, my first reaction to it was like, I didn't have them side by side, but my in-laws have Hennessy around, and so we'll occasionally have some Hennessy as like as a nightcap. And so a couple days later, I'm having the American Single Malt, and I'm like, you know what? That does kind of a similar thing with like that sort of level of sweetness that comes from that like intense wood flavor that's there. And I think in Hennessy, it's like added flavor. That's obviously not the case here. But something about that wood-derived wood sugars flavoring that's in there. And then on top of that, you got kind of this wine almost profile going on. Like there's a floral bouquet and it's very creamy and the mouthfeel is very, you know, creamy and smooth. And like, it's just those factors together. Like this is a completely unexpected turn on something that's very different in American Single Malt that everybody from the East Coast, West Coast, Southwest, like all these other distilleries, like you just don't get that. And to add another point in favor of like, hey, the North somehow aging in the cold makes things creamy. Nora from Lost Lantern has made that observation before, that they take whiskey that was distilled elsewhere in the country and sometimes age it in Vermont, and they feel like the same whiskey comes out creamier after having aged up in the North.
Yeah. And I see this. Don't know if you're saying let's talk ACM, and there was a comment. Yeah, there was a comment earlier about yeast, and I want to use that as a segue into ASM because they all kind of go together. You talk about creamy and like the floral and fruity thing. So we were talking right before we opened up our offline.
Here we go. Any special yeasts used? Yeah. Yes,
100%. And I want to. This is my nerdy specialty. I'm going to get real deep on this one. I come from a brewing background, and you know, yeast defines the style of beer that you're making. So yeast is like incredibly important. And for me, like coming from the brewing industry into distilling, like I thought, because in beer you get a yeast catalog from your suppliers, like literally like hundreds of yeast strains, like, and every different supplier sends you these catalogs so you can pick like, oh, I'm going to look at the Saison strains. Here's 25 different Saison strains. I'm going to make a Cole strain. Here's 10 different Cole strains, whatever. So I'm like, awesome. This is going to be cool. I'm going to learn about all these sweet distiller strains that I don't know anything about. And there's like 5. Like there's just nothing out there. And it's all dried yeast. That was the other thing too. I'm like, in beer, you only use liquid yeast, and you're constantly growing it and you're harvesting, repitching it. And that's just not possible in distilling. So like, I get why dried yeast is a thing, but I just like, that was such a shock to me going into the distilling world, coming from the brewing world. I'm like, everything I'd ever, you know, my understanding was that dried yeast is shit. And so I had no interest whatsoever in using it. So I'm like, okay, I can propagate yeast. We're going to use that
here, right? Somebody said early on, I don't remember if I showed of the comment, but let's acknowledge that now. Although I have to go through an hour of pre-show before I find it.
Yeah. And so like it was a big thing. It's like, okay, I'm going to use, I was making sour beers. Like there we go.
ASM when it's made by people with a solid brewing background, because
100%.
There's decisions brewers make that make excellent flavors that traditional distilling methodology from the heritage bourbon distilleries to coin a term, right? It just doesn't produce the same kind of flavors at all. And I think the brewing philosophy makes better flavors. And that's one reason I love American Single Malt so much.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, we don't have a pot still, but we can talk about that too. So my original plan was, I was like, I'm going to use Belgian yeast strains. I really like the characters. They're super estery phenolic. Like I think that would translate into distillate. And so that was the plan. I'd done a bunch of small scale stuff, and right, that's not illegal. And I thought I could you make interesting fermentation characteristics. I was solely focused on the fermentation side of things, because I believe that's you're setting yourself up for the long haul of maturation. And if you don't put the inputs in, you're not going to get in the outputs down the road. And then COVID hit. So we bought our building in August of 2019. We bootstrapped this whole operation. My business partner and I, we between ourselves, and then like we raised money to start the business. And so we were in the, raising capital for it, and then COVID hits, shuts everything down. And so, basically had a year plus to just sit there and do nothing. And so I was already making sourdough bread at home. I needed to find something else to do. Yeah. That had started a couple years earlier. And I got way into like rum and like turn of the century rum technology, late 1800s, early 1900s rum history. And what I thought was really interesting is, so again, everything kind of starting in beer, you had Christian Hansen isolating the first yeast strain, revolutionizes beverage alcohol throughout the world, right? Yeast is what makes alcohol, and this specific organism, if you isolate it, it's going to make a clean, pure thing. That makes its way to the Caribbean islands, and they're like, we need to adapt this right now. We got to modernize. We have to do all this stuff. And so you can kind of, there's a wonderful blog out there called Boston Apothecary that I was obsessed with. And he did a really great job of kind of like chronicling that time period up through like almost the, basically World War II, of like, you see this progression of scientists taking the very basic stuff, and as technology advances and their understanding advances, handing it off, because each island would hire an island chemist to improve the quality of rum. And it was mostly kind of based in Jamaica. And then you get this shift to this pretty incredible scientist out of Puerto Rico named Rafael Arroyo. And this is like 30s into the early 40s, what he looked at is he was trying to emulate high ester Jamaican rum scientifically, and through the choice of a very specific yeast strain and a very specific strain of bacteria. And that yeast strain that he advocated for was Schizosaccharomyces pombe, not Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So he looked at all the things, and obviously Saccharomyces is there, but like more prevalent in like wild ferments in the tropics in the Caribbean is Schizosaccharomyces pombe. Pombe has a very high stress tolerance, which if you think of the Caribbean, it's hot and it's, high acid. There's, all the things growing. So that particular organism can
and
thrive
if we're talking
in
about rum, right? They're putting dunder muck in.
Dunder muck, cane acid. Yep. Mm-hmm. And that's at the end of ferments. That was the only organism that was still creating alcohol. Saccharomyces cerevisiae dead, long gone, can't handle it. It's out of it. So he advocated that the better strain to use, kind of contradicting Christian Hansen, was you should be using pombe instead of cerevisiae, because of it handles the stress better, and it produces this thing he called rum oil, which is now we understand it's like, yeah, rum oil is, he called it the characteristic of rum, and it could only be produced by pombe and not cerevisiae. Okay. And you could go about it creating this rum oil two different ways. You can go it through how the Jamaicans do it, with is just like high stress, high acid, and it just like acid lyses this compound. It's beta-damascenone is what we understand it now. And beta-damascenone is kind of like that prized compound in like very high aged whiskeys, scotches, bourbons, cognacs, and rums. It has a very small amounts, but like in a high age, when it condenses down, it becomes a larger part of the flavor profile. They describe it as like rose-like, baked apple, floral, like dark fruits. It's kind of like an indescribable thing. And in the beer world, actually, it's considered a flaw. It's like an off flavor. Like you think of like sherry raisiny. In beer, that's not a good thing, but like in spirits, it's a prize note. And rum, particularly, it's like the compound. So he advocated like you have to use Pombe because it's going to produce this thing, and you can go about it two different ways. The wild method, which is how the Jamaicans did it, high acid, long aging. It's going to eventually liberate it in small amounts, but like the drawback is you get all those headsy off flavors and a lot of negative. So it's kind of like a blunt way of going around it, and you have a lot of waste. So he wanted to go about it scientifically, and he did it. You can do it enzymatically, and so that is a controlled high pH fermentation, 5.8, like a flatline 5.8 pH, which just fights nature to its core, because nature wants to make everything acidic. So he developed this patent called the Raphael Royal Heavy Rum Method, and it was this way of producing rum where you use a very specific, this Pombe yeast strain at a buffered high pH, and then you would like at the end add a secondary bacteria that would produce butyric acid, and you'd get like the pineapple with the rum oil. So that was my COVID rebel. I'm like, I want to try and make this, and so we do make rum in that method here, but through that process of like, you know, trying to, I think I ended up with like 50 different Schizosaccharomyces strains that I kind of sourced from all over the world, did a whole bunch of fermentation trials, and kind of like narrowed it down to a half dozen or so that when we started, kind of like with all the small scale trials I was doing, I'm like, I love this fermentation character. Like, this is what I want to use. I'm like, forget about the Belgian strains. We're going to go 100% all Pombe. And so that's what we make all of our whiskeys with Schizosaccharomyces Pombe. And it's one that I have banked here in our lab. And so we have 1 mil frozen cultures, and we propagate it up in-house. It's a 7-day prop to get it from, frozen culture to pitching volume. And then it's another 7-day fermentation after that. So that strain, I think, is really unique in its capabilities, and the way we use it is kind of both ways that Arroyo advocated for it. We were doing the highest or the heavy rum method with the controlled pH, and then we kind of followed the Jamaican way with our whiskeys, bourbon, rye, and single malt, in that we design our ferments they are not sterile whatsoever. They are open top wood fermenters that are not clean. They're loaded with bacteria. And we set up the ferments.
And again, it's not that it's a cold, sterile environment either. You've got a warm, steamy, basically steam heated distillery, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not -10 in the distillery.
So stuff can grow, right? Like it's not like, it's not inconsequential for sure.
Yes. The fermentation room is mostly climate controlled.
Okay.
So we design our ferments. There's no cooling. I will say that they're just big wooden tubs. And so we design the ferments that it's all a free rise in temperature that we're allowing the heat dissipating. Yeah.
As long as we're talking about the wood vats. How many? Donut Fisher wants to know because he did not count them when he was visiting.
We have 6. 2 of them are dedicated to rum. The 2 smaller ones that you would have seen Donut Fisher. And then the other 4 big ones, those are all our whiskey fermenters. One of them is a beer well. The other 3 are primary fermenters.
Yeah, and after this conversation, I wanna get myself some of the rum.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, yeah.
It's unique. It's my like side passion project.
As long as I've derailed it, Donut Fisher also says, "Do we love Beta Demescanone?" Did I pronounce that right?
Demescanone? I believe that's dark plums, roses, cooked baked apple, like. I think those are all positive flavor attributes. And if you look at a lot of like the research, it's ones that they like target in Scotch as like, that's kind of a key quality indicator. And so great and I've bounced around here a bunch, but like he advocated, if you target this in the beginning, everything else is going to fall into place, and you're only going to get, try and put a bunch of it in the get-go. So like, you don't have to rely on 20 years of aging to like condense it down to get it towards a significant part of your flavor profile. You can get it up front, and that's kind of the approach we've taken to it. So, and then going back to like how we design our ferments and the creamy mouthfeel that you talked about, we design the ferments where our pitch rates are extremely low. If you guys have ever done any like brewing or like understand it, like we do 1 million cells per milliliter is our pitch rate, which is like 1/10 of what a normal pitch rate is.
Okay.
It's really low.
I've done some home brewing, but nothing that scientific. It's just throw it in.
It's a very, very small pitch rate. And what that does is like essentially the ferment lags for 2 days. And during that lag pairs, bacteria is just running rampant. So the pH is just crashing out. Bacteria is getting free range at all the sugars that we've now made in our mash. And then the yeast finally like grows enough to where it starts to kind of kick off fermentation. What that does is now that yeast strain is kind of mimicking what we're doing, what's happening in the Caribbean, is like it's fermenting in this high stress environment. We're already talking like high 3s pH and like a significant total acidity. And it's got to fight through that. And what you're getting is a lot of like esterification and biotransformations where you're getting the creaminess, a lot of that ethyl lactate. That's going to that mouthfeel there. But then you're going to get a lot of those fruity esters from all the different bacteria that are just naturally coming off the grain and in the tank itself. So we design intentionally stressful ferments for this yeast strain that it has to fight through a very acidic environment. That the hope is we're setting it up again for that long-term aging where we have all the precursors to make very fruity, creamy distillates down the road.
Yeah, sounds great. There's this comment that keeps. Okay, sorry. While we're talking about fermentation, what are your total fermentation hours? How many hours is a total fermentation?
7 days.
7 days. So 7 times 24 hours. Go do the math.
Yeah. 100 and, yeah, I know that's
left. Proof is left as an exercise to the reader.
Yeah, I know that's like, and we're kind of going all over the place, but like
168 hours.
Yeah. When you slow it down, you're able to produce more esters, more long chain fatty acids that are going to give texture and like palate weight to the spirit. And again, all of our stuff is only 2 years old, but I think that it has a palate weight to it, and that's a product of fermentation. And I think when we don't have the luxury of like, again, going back to the thing, those big guys where they can just throw it in a barrel and let the barrel do all the heavy lifting. We're trying to do as much heavy lifting in the front end that we can get to a more mature product at a younger age because of the fermentation and how we're designing our ferments.
Yeah, that's definitely a pattern that we see in the really good single malts that, if you can afford it, if you can afford the time to wait for a long fermentation, or you can afford to have extra fermenters so you can have more fermentations going on in the pipeline, so to speak. The only reason not to do a longer fermentation, it seems, is if you just need to save the time and money for economy of scale or whatever. Because from what I've seen, the longer the fermentation time, the more I like the single malt. It's not universally true. Like there are no such things as absolutes in this, but it's usually a good sign. If you start talking about a 5, 6, 7 day long fermentation.
I just think your potential for flavor generation is higher the longer you ferment. When you're talking a 48, 72 hour ferment, it's a very intense, quick fermentation, and yeast will outcompete bacteria. Like in that type of a scenario, like yeast, like bacteria has almost no effect on the character of the ferment that you're producing. But when you slow it down like that and you give bacteria that advantage, like it's going to have a heavy influence on the final outcome, which is why they do the short ones, because your trade-off is alcohol and acids. So you're losing alcohol in exchange for acid production. Yeah.
So is it, I guess let's say you had unlimited time and you could let it ferment as long as you wanted to create as much flavor as you wanted until fermentation stops. We've run out of sugar or whatever. Is there a point where it's too long? Do you start developing like off flavors if you let it go too long?
Yeah, I mean,
the yeast die and the bacteria takes over and it turns to vinegar, or
Yeah, vinegar would be your enemy, especially with us with open top ferments. That was another one of my COVID rabbit holes, was making vinegar.
Mhm.
And
I did it by accident. We fermented a wine for too long.
yeah, and vinegar is this. It's actually pretty hard to make like a high quantity of vinegar, but you'll have enough where it like makes the flavor profile is going to be affected in the distillate. But like as far as like actual like commercial grade vinegar of what you're fermenting, like to get to 5% acidity is pretty hard to do. But yeah, our rum ferments are 14 days long, and we've gone longer. We've done like a 21 day, and that's where we start to see like some of the vinegar becomes too much of it. But on the flip side,
if you distill it, does the vinegar just go away?
Well, you get a lot of ethyl acetate, which in like rum is, can be prized in small amounts. If you treat it like, again, going back to blending, ethyl acetate can kind of act as like salt. Like a little bit can make everything pop. And so I think it's valuable to have, but in measured quantities.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I banned the Twitch user, by the way. Sorry, we were mildly distracted by there's always like bots that come in on Twitch.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
And I'm going to try to piece together this question, Donut Fisher. Does the U of M variety barley have more starch or ... less efficient at making alcohol but produces more flavor?
Yeah, I can talk about all of our grains in general. So I don't know if we talked about that when we first started. So we're an estate grown distillery. Nate, my business partner, he grows all the grains that we use: corn, rye, wheat, and barley. Of those small grains, the barley variety that we have been using is Pinnacle. That was one that we used at Shell's going back to there. Pinnacle is one, it was developed North Dakota, out of the North Dakota State Barley Breeding Program. And it kind of had a little moment, and then it fell off really quickly because it had, from the brewing side of things, it was too much, caused issues with filtration. But it had, what we liked about it, what we thought was the closest to like a European flavor profile that was grown in North America. It didn't have a very hot enzyme package. So like when you'd modify it in the malt house, it lended itself really well to like an under modified malt, which is more it's the type of variety that you prefer when you're making lager beers. Especially with like Shells, we're doing primarily German style lagers. We wanted to have that like German European type of a profile. So that's why we really liked Pinnacle from that way. But the majority of craft beer is all ales, and so it didn't really, it had a bit of a sulfur component to it, and then so it didn't really jive. But I really liked it, again, that cool enzyme package, and with that you can control your fermentation. So for us, again, uncontrolled open fermenters, you go in, and this is, I think, part of the benefit of being like your own farmer. You're making the grains. You can design and select varieties that are suited for the type of fermentation that you're trying to produce here at the distillery. And for us, we're trying to stretch things out. If we had, whatever modern variety that has kind of a hotter enzyme package that's over modified, it's going to be really hard to slow your fermentation down. The yeast is just going to rip through fermentation, and you can't, to get to 7 days is going to be really, really difficult. So having a variety that has that cooler enzyme package that lends itself to a longer, slower fermentation, that was the reason we selected that one. We do the same with the wheat and the rye. The wheat, I guess, is this past year we grew a variety called Torgy, MN Torgy. It's a one that was developed at the University of Minnesota in the early 70s, designed for bread baking. Again, modern agronomics is kind of a worthless variety, but we selected it from a flavor standpoint. It was prized for its baking characteristics. For the rye, we use a variety called Danko. It's an old Polish variety. That was like a late 60s, early 70s one, made for rye bread. Yields terrible, grows really tall, 6.5 feet tall. In the fields is typically what we get out of it. yields 60 to 70 bushels an acre, which a modern variety is like 180 to 200 bushels an acre. So less than half of what a modern variety does, but the flavor is fantastic. We love it's got this nice like cocoa powder characteristic. And again, it's a very cool enzyme package. Like rye in particular is one that usually has like really high protein, like the ferments just go crazy. Ours is almost the opposite, where it really struggles to ferment. And with that, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make these stressful ferments, to use a wine analogy, like the vines that struggle make the best wines. And we've applied that to what we're making with our distillers beers here, is that we want the bacteria to like slow everything down, that the yeast really has to struggle through it, produce a lot of those, long chain fatty acids. And like with the rye in particular, like those dried apricot orange notes that we're getting from it, that's all, the bacteria, the bacteria load coming off that grain in particular is crazy. Like at the end of every fermentation, there's a gnarly pellicle that when the grain bed drops, it just produces this white sheet on the top of it. And that's all, flora coming off the grain.
And who hasn't left something accidentally in the kitchen for long enough to see that pellicle form? Science experiments.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like we're creeping up in time and we haven't done a whole lot of tasting notes yet. And I'd love to bring Phill into the conversation now. We've talked about American Single Malt enough. I think it's time for us to get into it. I've already given you some of my impressions, right? Very sweet, woody kind of sugars. Back on, I don't know if we showed this comment, but Donut Fisher also mentioned there's another Minnesota American Single Malt producing a younger whiskey that also uses crosscut staves. It's a great way to leverage the tight growth rings of Minnesota grown oak. It's a very good point. You just got to access more of what's in there faster because it's cold, it's tight, it's dense. And I think that comes across in the flavor. Like I said, the flavors here are very unlike other American single malts. There was a time around 2 years ago where it seemed like every week I was getting an American single malt that pushed the envelope of what American single malt, or just single malt in general, could even do. And it's been a long time since I've had that envelope pushed again, but I think here we are with something that, like, initially I just did not know how to read it even, right? Like it's not that I didn't like it. It's just that, like, I don't have the vocabulary to associate some of what's going on in here with American single malt that, Lost Woods. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Another distillery that I've been meaning to have on the podcast. And that one's on me that I have not reached out. Germ knows I've been talking about having him on. He actually approached me at ACSA and was like, hey, we should do a thing. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And it's my bad. I ghosted him. It was not intentional. Yeah. Tom Sheppy is an awesome guy.
Yep.
He's so humble and he really cares about making really good whiskey.
Yeah. Yeah.
But back on this one. So, like I said, there's something about it that reminds me a bit of Hennessy, and I don't know how else to describe that because I don't really review cognac. I lack the vocabulary to say, like, what is that thing that's going on here? But I will say that coming back to this a few different times and with other whiskeys, I don't have my whole collection here, but I have a box of samples and I'll like try this. I tried it next to Buffalo Trace. That was a weird comparison. Like that was not flattering. And I sent Jace some notes based on that, and I feel bad now because it was just like one of those things where, like, you just subtract the wrong set of things and now it tastes weird. So I don't recommend having Buffalo Trace and then a pour of this. That didn't work. But that's, like, I find that happens with, if you try to mix bourbon and then American single malt in either order, it just goes wrong. It's not 100%. A good idea. You don't get good flights that way. Just don't do it. Stick to single malt or stick to bourbon. Don't try to do both at the same time. One of the coolest flavor notes I got out of this was like sassafras or something like that reminded me of root beer, but not every root beer, like some specific kinds of root beer. And Phill is completely on board and agreeing with me on that.
Sassafras hard candies. If you've ever had Clay's hard candies out of like an old country store somewhere, sassafras hard candies. Also, weirdly, around the edges of the palate, I get this note that reminds me of when I was a little kid and my mom would make us hot cocoa with the cheap Swiss Miss powdered cocoa mix and like the like fattier, heavier milk. And it's such like a a note that just sort of, triggers that like weird deep sense memory that, I didn't know that I remembered, that, it's just a very nice, warming, a note that I particularly appreciate.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I've had enough time with it. You'd think by now I would have come up with a good set of tasting notes, but all I can say is I've just been really enjoying this. This is a great session whiskey, right? Sit around with people and have a chat. Um, have some pistachios or something, right? It's just sometimes whiskeys don't need to have like a million flavor notes, right? I think this might be one of those, but I feel like it's just that I'm lacking the vocabulary to pull it apart. So I want to spend a lot more time with it. I'll do a written review. This is one of those that feels worth it, but it's fascinating. I don't know that there's like any flavor notes in here that I've gotten from other whiskeys before. So that's really cool. That's not in any way a bad thing. It's just I'm flabbergasted. I don't know how to read this whiskey, and that's a cool thing for me.
I think we struggle with it too internally, like because it does change a lot, and it's probably the one I'm most like self-conscious about because of the brewing background, and I also like knowing that we're bucking tradition, so like I kind of read into too many things. So, but kind of we had some conversation, offline. I was listening to your show with Murphy from Cedar Ridge, and there's kind of touched on the subject.
Was it the early one? Was it like episode? What was it, like 5 or something, or was it episode like?
No, it was the most recent. Yeah. Okay. Talking about pot still versus column still, and so like for people watching, listening that don't know, so we have a column still. It's a bourbon column, 14-inch column with a doubler, and we ferment on grain. So we have a 6-roller mill, mash cooker where we do not sterilize or wash, ferment in open top wood fermenters, and then distill it with the column still. And we try and distill it at a lower proof. And that
you
kind
also
of
distill on grain, or do you filter it?
Yep,
off?
distills on the grain. Yep, that's kind of how column stills are designed.
Okay.
And part of that conversation you guys had was twofold. Is one, you can't buy. Most people don't have the ability to buy multiple stills for multiple products, and yeah, so we bought a column still, and I wanted to focus on single malt, and this was before, the ASM Commission was still advocating for a TTB definition, but it hadn't been ratified yet. But it looked like what they were saying was that they didn't specify only pot still, because that was something we were looking at, and we were debating back and forth between pot still, column still, and the fact that they were not in their proposed rules not specifying that it had to be a pot still helped to sway us towards a column still, because we knew we liked column still bourbons and ryes, and thought like, hey, with the single malt, what if we do something different? And like when the laws did come out, when it had a looser definition, we looked at it as like, we're not trying to just emulate Scotch single malt. Like American single malt should be something different, and for better or worse, like we're going to do things differently that I think can at least hopefully add to the conversation of American single malt, and that helps in differentiating it from traditional Scotch single malt whiskey.
Yeah. And also with a column still, and you make other products, you have a bourbon and a rye, and you have rum, and do you have other products, or is that the whole portfolio now?
Yeah, we have a gin we make. It's kind of a weird thing. We make this gin.
Right? You got to make a clear spirit.
Yeah, we have a cocktail room, so we had to make everything in house for the that's a Minnesota law. You have to make everything in house for that. So, but as far as like retail, like our focus is whiskey. That's like I said, that's 95% of our production is whiskey.
Yeah. So what's nice as a small startup, you get to do more with less equipment, right? You make your clear spirits, you make your bourbon and rye, which are, you can do them on a pot, sure, but traditionally they're column still. At least, yeah, I mean, bourbon and rye are basically an American tradition. Or even in Canada, I guess they probably mostly do column still. Could be wrong about that. I don't know anything about Canadian whiskey. Don't listen to me. But yeah, the point stands. You get to do more with less. And the fact that the law doesn't require you to have a pot still when you don't have the volume to justify it, that's just better for the business, I think. So, and, you know, for one, I know that some people maybe disagree that, you know, single malt should be on a pot still. That's the way they do it in Scotland, blah, blah, blah. They shouldn't have made that exception to the rules. I've seen those arguments. Personally, I think column still and hybrid stills are so quintessentially part of the American distilling tradition that to exclude their use from American single malt whiskey would de-Americanize American single malt whiskey to some extent. So I like that we have the option. And there's definitely good American single malts coming out that have column still production.
That's the approach that, you know, we talked about. When we were in the startup phase, I reached out to Chattanooga and New Riff, talked to them both because they were both brewers themselves, and they said, you know, New Riff has since released their American single malt that I adore, and Chattanooga has not yet, but they sent me some samples, and they were like, yeah, this is like, I don't see any reason why this wouldn't work, and they were all doing on grain column stilled single malt, so that's why we went for it. And had, back to my brewing days, had a separate, different conversation with a winemaker, and she talked about how, like, in wines, you can use tannins in fermentation to build structure. Like, if you have a very tannic primary fermentation, those tannins are going to fade out. Like, you're talking like grape skins and even like the stems themselves. Those tannins, you know, will get, you know, transformed during fermentation, but also like will drop out in maturation, and it leaves you with structure and depth. And like, I know, again, like having New Riffs, I think it's their 7-year American single malt, like the weight on that type of that whiskey, I mean, it has the same palate weight of a pot stilled whiskey. And I think a big part of that is the on grain tannins and how those transform into palate weight. And so it's a different way of creating palate weight, and it gives you a different experience, I think, when you're drinking whiskey than pot still.
That reminded me. Have you seen this? I think this is probably not a secret to people inside the industry, but have you seen this technique where they add egg whites to a barrel of wine to crash out the tannins?
I've seen
What
that.
do you think of that?
Winemakers do things that make brewers cringe, and like see, one of those things is like, what are you doing? Now I'm a distiller, and like nothing is clean, so yeah, I can't say anything. But like, that's just one thing. I'm like, you're dumping an egg into your finished product, like what?
Yeah,
I don't know. I have not tried it.
I'll have to research that more. It feels unsanitary.
Yeah.
That's all I can say about it.
100%.
Cool. Yeah. So Donut Fish is loving the Black Frost ASM. And of course we're getting to that part of the show. We're getting requests for, hey, can I get your product? I'd love to try. So Ethan wants to know if you distribute to the Northeast.
We do not. I mean, we're basically Minnesota right now. We're just going into Wisconsin a little bit here, but like Minnesota is kind of it. We're looking at getting a, you know, online DTC. So I've had talked to a bunch of the different, you know, DTC platforms, and I think we've picked one. We had to get through Black Friday and release, and like that's our next step now, is to go to that.
Yeah, so I know I would love to be able to actually retail purchase your products. I mean, really appreciate the samples as always. Distilleries that, you know, when we like a distillery, we like to actually, you know, send like patronize them, right? Like, you know, give them some money for the stuff, for their hard work. So, you know, definitely all the disclaimers aside, right? Sometimes we get early access to products, we get products for free. Almost in all cases, Phill and I end up buying whiskey from these distilleries on our own anyway, because we want to support them because we want to maintain our objectivity and our editorial, the perception that we have objectivity by let's at least buy something and review it that wasn't in the presence of the person who gave us free samples.
And
So,
I just want more.
yeah, that too.
I've taken this bottle to
As
D&D.
evidenced by your background.
Yeah.
And mine, right? To be fair, not right now, but usually.
But like I took the Black Frost American Single Malt to D&D with me on Tuesday. And one of my D&D players is his family is from Minnesota. And he has plenty of family up that way, and he and his dad both quite enjoyed your whiskey. And I am led to believe that they will be looking for it next time they're in the area. So
yeah, what they say, right? Like if you want to know whether somebody's recommendation for a whiskey is any good, you have to look at what else they liked. My sister-in-law and her boyfriend loved this whiskey. They thought it was basically one of the best things I served them. And to be fair, it was tough competition too, because the other things I had them try were basically the Lost Lantern Scotch Lovers Collection, all of those, the 11-year 888, the Warfield, and the McCarthy's 10-year, which, like, no surprise, they topped the charts. But my sister-in-law still said, this whiskey is one of the best things you've ever served me, up there with the Lost Lantern Mountain Meadow, which she also really loved, another super unique whiskey, and the Swift Sauterne Cask, which is like, those two whiskeys are not alike in any way, and this whiskey is not like those whiskeys in any way, but there's something that she's latching onto with all of these, which is that they have a really nice creamy mouthfeel and kind of a light flavor profile that delivers a lot of interesting flavors. So that's the kind of company that we're in here. So I love being able to taste my friends and my sister-in-law on whiskey that, they otherwise wouldn't have gotten to try, because they bring such fresh takes sometimes. It's like, I've tasted thousands of whiskeys at this point. I don't have that level of enthusiasm anymore for new products, right? I don't have that. We were talking about this on Three Guys, One Grain. Shout outs to our other show now, where Germ asked us, like, hey, do you still have that same excitement for Scotch? Answer, no, right? You still have that same excitement for American Single Malt? Yeah, pretty much. But we're like hundreds of whiskeys in now. And like, it's hard to be excited every single week. But there's something about this whiskey, and every once in a while you get something from Lost Lantern or somebody else, that it really is exciting. I've never tasted this before. How did they do that? I want to know more. And I think one of the best outcomes we could have from a conversation like this is that the conversation across the country becomes, hey, where do I get Black Frost Distilling? So I can't wait until you get distribution out our way to the Northeast and everywhere else.
I appreciate that. And
yeah, I want more.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. We're just getting started, and we've definitely learned things in the 3 years we've been going. Just, I really like our fermentation profile. Like when we first started, we were cycling through 4 different strains. And so like these first ones I know has a couple of the other 2 strains that we've kind of like more relegated to like smaller blender portions. And so like that, will continue to evolve into like the strain that we've selected for our house one. And the other thing too is we started initially with all new oak. That was something I just thought, again, with the on grain and column, like I thought it needed new oak, and we have now since started laying down a lot of used oak as well. And again, all our own in-house, like our used bourbon barrels, used rye barrels, and used rum barrels are like, we'll like start it and then refinish it on a rum barrel. And so I think we'll have a lot more, like our blending potential will continue to grow as we get, further along in our journey as a distillery. So yeah, this is where we're starting. And again, this was going back to like, you're guessing when you're starting a distillery, and especially when you're trying to do things differently with intention, it's our best guess. And
every decision you made here was intentional. Grain from the family farm, the varieties that you want, the yeast that you handpicked, the wild fermentation, which you don't have direct control over, but is definitely an intentional choice. I mean, everything here is handcrafted in the best way, right? Some people feel like craft is a bad word. Like you say, this whiskey tastes like craft. Like, Raw grain flavors and that sort of thing. Like those things do pop up, and they usually like more age or new formulation or whatever, right? Like those things, a lot of distilleries will grow beyond those things. I don't necessarily feel like these whiskeys don't have the craft flaws that you would normally associate, but it does. And I preface with that because I want to say this feels like craft. This feels like craft whiskey, handmade a way that nobody else has done before, to your specifications, to your vision. And I think it really shows through. And it's not just the American Single Malt Whiskey. Now, I know Phill doesn't have these samples, but I do want to touch on these other whiskeys.
I'll get you some samples, Phill.
I mean,
it's my fault for not asking. Phill, you can light me up about that later. Hey, how come you got samples I didn't get?
It'll all come out in the wash. I'm not worried.
So we talked about the sassafras note on the American Single Malt. Backing up to the malted rye, which is like, it's a really good side-by-side because we're talking about two different malted grains.
Malted grains, yep.
And is it just malted rye in this mash bill, or is there regular unmalted rye? Is there other grains in here?
Yeah, so again, it's that same blended process where like the original whiskeys are 100% rye. We blended in 4 barrels of corn, a corn recipe. So it's like 18% corn, 2% malted barley. So it's like 80-18-2.
Okay.
Of that, 82% is all malted grains. And then of that 80% of the rye, 25% of it is caramel malted rye.
Yep. Okay.
But
okay. Yeah, Donut Fisher says, let's go back to the ASMW. Look, we need to talk about the other ones, okay? Yeah. So there's no hops in any of these, right?
No.
Okay.
No. During the yeast propagation phase, I add hop extract as just a preventative for like keeping the growth medium. But I mean, that you're talking like
for freshness. Okay.
A drop.
Okay.
No, not even no. There's no hop characters. It's only as a preventative for bacterial growth during yeast propagation.
Gotcha. So I wasn't saying I'm detecting any hop flavor, although now that you've said that, I wonder if I am. But I'm not gonna trick myself into that though. But what I was gonna say is
less than a milliliter in 2,000 gallons.
Wow. River Roots gave us some malted rye to try. That was 80% plus malted rye plus some other stuff. And the flavor profile I'm getting off of this is actually pretty similar minus the hops. So I'm really looking forward to like doing a side-by-side with those samples with Phill when we get a chance. We talked about the American Single Malt kind of has a root beer thing going on. If anything, this one has kind of a cherry Coke thing going on. It's like a different soda. And I don't know why my brain is just going there. But again, I feel like these whiskeys read very sweet. And not necessarily in a bad way. They're not cloying. There's just a lot of sweet flavors in here. So that's lovely. And to be quite honest, I think my favorite of the three is the malted rye. And the bourbon, I mentioned candy corn. I don't really get soda on this one, but this is a really nice bourbon. I'm finding that I really enjoy bourbon that comes from the north. I think I've always kind of bounced off of Kentucky bourbon, and the more I try craft bourbons from up north via Lost Lantern or anybody else, the more I like it. I think maybe the quick aging or the quick fermentation or whatever it is that they're doing with the traditional Kentucky bourbon just doesn't agree with me. And I'm learning that I actually don't hate bourbon. I just have preferences about certain things. And it's really good. I wish that I had these earlier to try them a little bit more. It's also a wheated bourbon, and wheated is kind of a magic word in the tater community, so to speak. So maybe you're doing yourself some marketing, like free marketing. It's calling it a wheated bourbon.
Well, we looked at it as like we wanted to feature wheat in the bourbon, rye in the rye, and barley in the single malt. So like kind of sure. the primary flavoring grain featuring 3 different grains and 3 different products.
Corn, of course, having no flavor.
Well, no, I mean, corn duck, yeah. Calling out the small grains. Yeah. I will say, like, the wheat component, we have like grown that a lot since we started, because like we just love how that is just like, it's just candy in a barrel. So at some point we'll have just a straight wheat whiskey come out that we just love, that the wheat blending component that we've been laying down, just to release that on its own.
That would be really cool to see.
And it's 100% malted wheat, 100% malted wheat whiskey.
That's interesting to me, because I haven't had a whole lot of wheat whiskey, and the ones that I have had have been really interesting. And I don't think any of them are malted wheat or have any malted wheat in them. So that's really interesting to me in the sense that that would be totally unique in my collection.
Yeah, I think that would probably be the next release in our, kind of fill out the portfolio.
All right, so we are here with someone who's made an entire brand out of blending different whiskeys together, and so it feels appropriate that I do the verboten and blend all of these whiskeys together.
Go for it.
So here we go, and we'll give that a chance to sort of settle down as we do a little bit of a wrap up here. So yeah. Also, just to throw you another compliment, I have I only pour this much at it. You can't see my glass. I only pour like this much at a time. Maybe like half an ounce, a little bit more than that. I've refilled the bourbon twice, and I've refilled the rye malt once, and I think that's just because I started drinking it later. And I've been like, this family doesn't drink a whole lot of whiskey. What we found was like everybody liked this, but everyone wanted to have tea and beer. So this actually was mostly me drinking 20% of a bottle by myself in the last week.
Okay. That's awesome.
And I mean, it's the only full bottle of whiskey I have to hand. Actually, that's not true. I have some bourbons over here, but yeah, because that's just what's in the house. This is the only American single malt whiskey I have to hand, so it makes sense this is the one that I'm drinking. But like, I'm really enjoying it. It's like, it's juice. I'm gaming with it. I've got, I've been reading books and sipping along with it. Like, I'm basically on vacation right now, and this is a great vacation companion. I'm very happy to have this here. So as we get into the show wrap up, I feel like we've talked a fair bit about like American single malt philosophy. But if you had some other like points and thoughts that you wanted to explore with us, Jace, now might be a good time.
Yeah, that was kind of going back to that. And again, I talked about this in a couple different lights, but I think for American single malt to continue to grow, I think it's important to have different points of view that you bring to the category that's going to help elevate the category. And I hope that we can offer one of those points of view that is allowed with the broader definition of the category. And again, if it's, just with the different type of still and how you're fermenting things, like, I think that because this category, is a very small, part of the bigger whiskey profile in America. And especially if you compare it to like global, single malt sales. And I think that's, I hope that's what helps to grow the category, is that we can bring something unique and something different to that category that helps make it a broader category, a wider thing, that it's appeals to more palates. I don't know where else I guess to go with that, but I hope that's something we're trying to do. And then like with the terroir piece of it, and like the regionality of, you kind of hinted at like how northern whiskeys have a bit of a different flavor profile. I mean, that's what we're also trying to do is, and if you think of Pacific Northwest single malts and like what Mark's doing down in Arizona, right, New Mexico, with Whiskey Del Bach, and like adding some regionality to Colorado single malts, and like hopefully we can be part of that piece too. I think that's important for the American single malt category, is that you have different flavor profiles and different points of views with the different goals of what you're trying to produce. I think that's all good for the category, and it's something that I'm excited about. Like, I personally just love this category too, and I approached it from just an enthusiast standpoint, is like, I wanted to have something to say about where we're from, and what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So do you think for you, part of the conversation is going to be finishing casks or peat even? I think Minnesota has some peat.
Minnesota has a ton of peat. Yeah. That is a conversation for Phill, our brother Justice, because he's the peat guy there. We do not do any peat. And again, that was an intentional choice, trying to not replicate Scotch. I just didn't want to do it. We have used cherrywood smoked malt. And going back to my brewing days, I thought it was always effective in like a sub-threshold usage, so like less than 5%, like 1-2%, and that's kind of what we
salt in the cookies kind of thing.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Like where you can't pick it out, but it's there, it does something, and so that's how we've used it. Also, where I worked in Germany, it's just outside of Bamberg, and Bamberg is famous for their smoked beers. So I do love smoked beers, but I didn't want to like make a just smoke bomb of a whiskey. Although it would be fun to just do 100% cherrywood smoked single malt, which would just be like bacon juice. But I mean, maybe that would be the worst thing ever.
You could call it ode to bacon.
Yeah, ode to bacon.
Just don't call it ode to a region of Scotland.
Yeah, don't call it ode. Mark's videos are pretty good about that. I saw. Yeah, so that's kind of where we approach it with the peat thing and not using peat, but to hype up Phill for a future episode, like northern Minnesota is loaded with peat, and he patented a new method of cold peating whiskeys, which I've tried. Encouraging you to have him talk about it. Yep, definitely different.
It's definitely it's a different. It certainly is peat. It's different. It's a different expression of peat. It's good. I feel like that's a bit of a hot take. I know that a lot of people I've talked to at least feel like it's not necessarily good. I think it's good. So, but that's the thing. Not every whiskey is going to be for every person, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that's the beauty of having this like looser definition is we can do things that expand and appeal to different people. And that's what I hope helps to continue to grow the category.
So I want to talk about, there's a couple of comments coming in. People are talking about some other products. So O'Shaughnessy's release of their pot stilled.
Yeah.
Isn't my fave, but we also have Freedom Malts is drinking the Lost Lantern Discovery Painted Stave Delaware American Single Pot Still, which is not American Single Malt, but is that Irish single pot still style of whiskey that Talnua, and I knew about Talnua. I didn't know about Painted Stave. I'm excited to try that when I get a chance.
It is monster.
Ethan has moved on from Scotch and has grabbed the Stillman Sonder from Dancing Goat, the 10-year-old MGP American Single Malt. I have a contact who has a contact at Dancing Goat, and I'm going to see if I can have them on to talk about that, even though, at some point we should probably try to talk to MGP, but they're huge. I don't know if they're going to talk to us, but Dancing Goat, I think, would talk to us.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that would be a really cool conversation to have. And Donut Fish says Kentucky has nothing on Minnesota ASMW. I think Kentucky has very little when it comes to American single malt whiskey. You've got, I think, Green River and wherever the Bullet ASM is distilled, which might be MGP.
It might be MGP.
And then there's Bardstown.
Claremont Steep.
Right, which we don't talk about them. They're not good.
Yeah, no, they're not.
Just a quick comment, and that was something that came up in the Cedar Ridge talk too, is from how I perceive it, just tasting it, I think they're using distiller's malts, which would be like their enzymatic malt for their bourbon whiskey and just making 100% version of that. And I think that's you have to select the malt to make a malt whiskey. I think that's a very different thing, and that's whether it's, getting good English malts or like North American malts that have that cooler enzyme package or more flavor profile. You can't just use distiller's malts. It has to be like a brewer style malt, Golden Promise or whatever that is designed for this type of whiskey.
And as we talked about at length, not just choosing your malt, but also choosing your yeast to play well with the malt, and not just picking the commodity yeast, the commodity malt, just because that's how you make bourbon, right? We look at our friends in Tennessee. Jack Daniel's making as much ethanol as they possibly can and then filtering it to hell and back so they can stick it in a barrel and strip off any sense of flavor that it isn't directly from the barrel. And somehow have banana ester come out the other side.
I'm not convinced that isn't a byproduct of maple charcoal.
It might be.
And I only say that because I have accidentally caught a chunk of sugar maple on fire.
Yeah, and speaking of the Lincoln County process, the Aiken County process for cold peated is amusing. I like the name of it. I like the
that's where they get their peat from.
the taking the piss out of Jack Daniel's a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this little blend that I did of equal parts of all three of these did not turn out well, and no surprise, right? Leave the blending to the masters. It still has that creamy mouthfeel. That's definitely there, but it got spicy in kind of a bad way compared to like all of these were pretty subdued on the spice level. Like the bourbon had a bit of spice. The blend of all three really brought the spice out. I'm not a big fan of it. And I think those delicious cherry Coke and root beer notes kind of got buried, so we're left with something that's a bit lifeless and spicy. So this is Phill. Chalk this one up to the worst blend I've ever done.
Ooh, that's a pretty low mark or a high mark, depending on your point of view.
I don't know. So far, we've had pretty decent results, so it had to turn out bad eventually. All right, so just going to push one more time on everybody wants to know. So you've got lots of new oak. You've mentioned refill casks, but what about finishing casks?
So we finished some of this with our bourbon, our used bourbon casks, and we have since gone into first fill with the used bourbon casks. Same with our rum cask because we've started releasing some barrel aged rum. That's kind of where we're at right now. Is with bourbon, rye, and rum casks for either going in, first fill or as a finish.
So
that being said,
casks for American.
Trying to keep everything in house. That said, I'm friends with a bunch of winemakers in Minnesota that I would love to again stick into that whole terroir thing. Is it utilizing some used Minnesota wine casks? I think that would be kind of my next step there. Or beer casks for sure is one of the things. Started at Shell's before I left was a cave aged barrel aged program where we filled used bourbon barrels in our old lagering caves underneath the brewery. We haven't had enough of our own bourbon barrels to send to them, but utilizing their used beer casks there. I got some other brewer friends that I would love to utilize some of their stout casks that way. So I kind of want to again stick within the borders of finding interesting casks within our state and just doing it that way.
Yeah,
I will
that sounds
say
awesome. Yeah, definitely keep like a Sauterne cask would be cool, or a French wine cask would be cool, but it would immediately lose your all Minnesota made. So yeah, I can see that being
and I love those finishes too, and like that's just not what we're trying to do. So
I think the single malt would take a wine cask finish really nicely.
And
it definitely has some those, like you said, those winier notes. I think it would be complementary, even as a smaller portion of a blend.
And see, meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, the single malt would be really interesting to try finished in like a really dry stout cask.
Yeah.
Sort of see how that turns out.
Yeah, there's just a hint of a chocolatey note on the single malt also. Yeah, for sure. So Ethan, on the note of the MGP American Single Malt, I don't think I have tried Yellowstone. I don't remember what I thought of it. I may actually have a sample with me because I was thinking I should spend more time with it. I still feel like I have to try, like Dancing Goat only puts out good products. Let's put it that way. Like I feel like if they released a 10-year MGP American Single Malt with their brandy background and sensibilities, I think it's going to be a very different thing than Yellowstone. So I want to try it. I'm not going to write it off until I do. But thank you for your notes. I really appreciate that. It's also finished in 3 different casks. So we'll probably lose the malt a little bit. Sure. Okay. But nothing wrong with a good finish. Jonah Fisher says, "Sign me up for anything stout cask." So you've got a vote for wine cask and a vote and 2 votes for stout cask. So I think, and with your brewer's background, maybe that's the more logical outcome. All right, we're getting close to 2 hours here, and I feel like we've boiled the ocean pretty good here. I think it's time for us to sign off.
All right.
So, Jace, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And we got way geekier than I thought this conversation. I'm going to write this one down as one of our geekiest. I think second only to Reed Huddleston, which is a great episode if you really want geeky stuff.
Yes, I love geeking out with Reed. He's for sure one of my favorites to do that with.
And just one more time, since we finally launched our Patreon, I'm just going to send that link out there into the world, patreon.com/singlemaltfrontier. The point is to make it possible for you to support the podcast, and we're working on how to make it valuable to you, because that's what the reason we didn't for so long is because we felt like we can't ask you for money for what we want to be a free show. We borrow distillers' time to tell their brand stories to you, and it doesn't feel right to charge for that. But as you know, it costs money to run a podcast, so we appreciate any bit of support you want to send us. And as always, you can still buy the Glencairns, and you can buy Phil's barrel stave pens that are made from, in some cases now, American Single Malt Whiskey staves.
All of them are made from American Single Malt Whiskey barrel staves.
Awesome. Cool.
I
need to rectify the fact the only one I have is a wild turkey stave. So I gotta get me an American Single Malt Whiskey stave from you.
Okay.
Let's go back to talking about American Single Malt Whiskey. So you can smell the American Single Malt Whiskey on the pen if you believe.
I mean, it certainly smells really good and slightly peaty and slightly sweet when I'm working the wood.
Yeah, I bet that's definitely an experience. All right, I'm not going to go off on another tangent. I will simply say thank you all so much for being here. And until next time, we'll see you in the lodge. Good night, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.